I am Richard Murphy. I'm Professor of Practice in International Political Economy at City, University of London. One of the astonishing things that is going on at the moment is that the real challenge to tax abuse is coming from the competition authority, not from the tax authority of Europe. Because Europe's tax authority hasn't got the right to challenge an individual state on having a low tax rate. But the competition authority has got the right to challenge the use of a low tax rate with a secret agreement to provide assistance to a company. Now, that is what is alleged happened in the case of Ireland and Apple. It's suggested there was a secret agreement which was exclusive to Apple, which nobody else got advantage of, which let them basically run companies registered in Ireland in a way that meant that no tax was ever paid on some of them, and incredibly low rates of tax on others. So Ireland was allowed to basically let Apple run riot with the international tax system and pay no tax pretty much outside the USA. And thank God for a brave competition commissioner who understands that actually tax justice is dependent upon a level playing field and openness and transparency, because that's what her argument is. Does this act to the credit of the European Union? Yes, clearly it does, because a supranational power, the EU, is being used to tell a national power, Ireland, you cannot continually run the race to the bottom, undermining the tax systems of other countries. And I believe that's essential. We need to have an authority that can say, we're protecting individual countries from abuse from other countries. And there are smaller states, by and large, who are willing to undermine larger states, by and large, and Ireland is one of those. I would like to see more of this type of action. I believe at the end of the day, we need a world tax authority. And the main job of that World Tax Authority will be to protect the right of individual democracies to set their own tax rules for their own countries in accordance with the wishes of their own people, which won't be undermined by multinational companies and large firms of accountants trying to abuse it by locating in tax haven locations. I believe that there are a number of areas where tax harmonization is pretty much essential. First of all, let's understand what corporation tax is. It actually is a backstop tax in a technical sense. You have a corporation tax always as an anti-avoidance measure, because if you didn't have a corporation tax on companies, then people would shift their income out of their own name into a company and not pay tax on it. So the reason why we even created corporation tax was simply to stop avoidance in the first place, because otherwise there would be no tax paid on these companies and individuals could literally abuse by shifting everything into a company. Now we have people shifting from a company in one place to a company in another place. You can even pick up a whole company from one country in the world and move it to another country in the world now, just to save tax. To stop this type of abuse, we have to have harmonization of rules. The idea that rules are a bad thing is absurd. Try playing football without rules. You can't. The only way you get a decent game of football is because everybody complies with the rules and there's an independent referee who enforces them. Well, actually, these days there are 4 referees at least, and some video technology. Now, the point about all that is that we need the rules to make sure that competition works. We need the rules to make sure that countries can be defended, the rights of them can be upheld, and we need it to effectively create a fair league in which everyone's competing on what they can truly do, how they service a customer. But we're not getting that. We're getting those rules abused at present. So harmonization is simply about creating a level playing field in which all businesses can compete fairly and they're not abused, and countries are not abused by the rogue outlying states. The rogue outlying states are by and large under the heavy influence of the finance industry. Let's look at the small tax havens. I know quite a number of them. Let's think about Jersey. Almost half its national income comes from the finance industry. Can it stand up to finance and say you can't do what you like? No, of course not. There's no economy left. It's been captured. We call that the finance curse. Finance has captured these states to such a point that they can no longer operate in their own interest. They have to suit the needs of international capitalism. And the need of international capitalism, as those international capitalists see it, is to undermine the rule of law in other countries so tax is not paid. Well, actually, we need to uphold the rule of law. We need to ensure that tax is paid. We need to ensure there's a fair balance, and that can only be done with harmonisation. What on? The rules of taxation, particularly for large companies, what is allowable, what isn't allowable, the rules of accounting, so we don't have those abused as well, so everybody calculates their profits in broadly the same way, and on tax rates. I'm not saying they've got to be all the same, but I do think there needs to be a minimum. What would the minimum corporation tax rate be in my estimation? Look, around the world, 20% seems to be a pretty common lower level of income tax for countries to charge. The start point is often around 20%. Surely we should expect companies to pay at least as much as we expect most individuals to pay in most countries. So 20% must be the base point to start from. But actually, I believe that if we do set 20%, the room exists for other countries to charge more if they wish. I'd love to say it was straightforward. I'm going to be honest with you, no, it's not. We are using some pretty powerful and deep analytical methods. Remember, when we talk about a multinational company, we might be talking about an organization that has itself got 1,000 companies within it, and which might be linked. And one of the things we're quite curious about is the scale of the links between one large company and another large company by the bits they work on together. So to actually understand a company is, I'm afraid, quite difficult. I don't think anyone fully understands. I would put it to you very strongly that the companies themselves don't fully understand what they are doing, and even know how big they are sometimes. So no, it's not easy. I do think it's worth trying to follow some blogs on the issue. It's one reason why I've written the tax research blog for over a decade now, of trying to put out information on particular issues and how you can interpret them. But my best advice, if we're talking about economics, is actually get your head around what tax is, what money is, what national debt is, how the economy works. It's always in balance, by the way. Because that's just an accounting necessity, that it's always in balance. It's just in balance in the wrong place. That's what's really important. And where is it in the wrong place? Those core issues, debt, tax, money, how the economy balances, how different things can be stimulated as a result, are key. I did explain that in my book, The Joy of Tax. I still think it's quite good and accessible. It's not an academic. It's very much meant to be an ordinary read. Seems to have worked. David Cameron, when he was Prime Minister, had a joke about it. That's fine by me. It helped boost sales. But it's intended to explain why tax is a great thing. Understand that tax is the single most powerful mechanism we've got to shape the society we live in. And you realise the power of that tool to deliver social justice, and that's why I'm a campaigner on it. One of the things I've looked at is PFI. PFI, Public Finance Initiative, is where in practice the government borrowed money at very expensive rates of interest from the private sector and wrapped it up in a service contract. So the building we're sitting in is not a PFI building as far as I know, but it could be. It could have been built by an independent contractor who then continued to own it. It was rented to the government under a PFI contract. And if we wanted the light bulb change, we'd have to pay that independent contractor to do it. It's an extraordinarily expensive way for the government to raise money. It was very popular in the 1990s and has continued to date because governments were obsessed about keeping the level of borrowing down on their own balance sheets. It became the golden rule, which was going to fix whether you could join the euro or not. That's why it was so obsessed about in the 1990s. Well, of course, we didn't join the euro in the UK. We didn't need to have only 3% annual borrowing of our GDP, and we didn't need to have these fixed ratios. But we carried on with PFI. PFI is a disaster because it's expensive. It basically transfers taxpayers' money to private companies for no real gain at all. The government can borrow money right now in the UK at an effective 0% interest. Now, there's a real charge to pay, I agree. It's about 1.5% or so they pay at the moment, but inflation is over 2%. So in fact, actually, the debt's going down in value by more than we're paying in interest. So the real interest rate is negative, but we're paying really strong positive interest rates to PFI companies. My answer? Well, it's something that I suggested to Jeremy Corbyn, which he picked up: people's quantitative easing. Quantitative easing is the government buying back basically its own debt. The government owes PFI companies. Buy that debt back by issuing new bonds on which the real interest rate is nothing. Cancel that for good. Get the PFI out of the system, clear it out from hospitals, clear it out from schools, remove the burden on local authorities who are absolutely crushed by some of these debts, and focus upon really supplying healthcare, education, social care, and all the other things that these authorities should be worried about, and not running for the benefit of the financial services industry, which is what they're doing now. If we were to pay PFI debt off, clearly there would be a cost. We'd obviously have to compensate. How much would we have to compensate? Very good question. It almost certainly would be subject to individual negotiation. There may be contractual clauses which they would try to appeal against, but let me give you one positive advantage of Brexit. There would be no appeal outside UK courts in the future if we wanted to buy back PFI debt post-Brexit, because the UK courts would be the Supreme Court, and if Parliament said there is no appeal, or this is the rate of compensation you're going to get, that's it. So to some extent, there is an advantage to restructuring the economy to not at this moment have the European Court of Justice, which has tended to favour international capital over governments. So curiously, there's a silver lining to Brexit in this particular case. I'm not a fan of Brexit. I don't think overall it's the right thing to do. But I do believe the European Union itself needs to rebalance between international capital and the people of the individual member states. I think it's got that balance wrong. It's too biased to capital. Leaving at the moment might let the UK show how we could reorganise our economy for the benefit of people, create something which is entirely new, lead the way for Europe to actually reform itself, and who knows, one day we might be all back in the same club again.